All right, welcome back to the channel, subscribers. Terence Crawford's numbers are in for the Aegis Kalvanakis fight. The viewership on ESPN, and let me tell you, man, I don't care what these people try to sell. This is a tremendous drop. A tremendous drop in performance from Terence Crawford from the last time that he was on the ESPN card. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel, subscribers. If you are not subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way you can be notified of when we release more videos. And also I want to say a special thank you to everybody that supports the channel in the membership down here, also in the Patreon. And we got a new video we put up yesterday, and also the live streams. Please make sure you come to OG Boxing Talk on Sunday mornings, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time with myself, Blood Boxing, KQKC Boxing, and Trap House Boxing, and Curtis Anderson, the boxing historian. Let's get into this, man, okay? And we ain't gonna polish no turds around here. Terence Crawford's numbers have dropped by about 1 million viewers between the last time that he was on ESPN fighting Jose Benavidez and when he fought Aegis Kalvanakis in just last Saturday. So the numbers have come out. I've heard different numbers come out from different people, but they're all right around in the same range. Okay, so the numbers that I have is Kalvanakis, the fight with Kalvanakis peaked at 1.6 million viewers. Peaked. That means the most people that were watching for a minute during that telecast was 1.6 million. The average people that were watching through the telecast, I've heard different numbers. I've heard 1.3, I've heard 1.4. So for the sake of this, I'm gonna go with the higher number and say it was 1.4 million people average watch the telecast, okay? Now, when you listen to it, you think, okay, 1.6 million peak, 1.4 million watched, that's a lot of viewers. Let's look, though, back at the last time Terence Crawford fought on ESPN. And we can also look back at the last time that there was a fight that took place on ESPN after the Heisman Trophy. Okay, so we're looking at similar numbers and comparing the performance of this fight to similar circumstances to say, whether it's a success, whether it's not. First numbers, the Jose Benavidez fight against Terence Crawford back last year. Why do I think that is important? Because that is the last time that Terence Crawford fought on ESPN, not ESPN Plus and not the pay-per-view, okay? So I'm not talking about his fight with Amir Khan, which was a pay-per-view fight. That was not on ESPN. That was not on ESPN. That was on the pay-per-view, and it wasn't on ESPN Plus. It was on, and I think who was on ESPN Plus? I think Jeff Horn's fight might have actually been on ESPN Plus. But the last time that Terence Crawford fought on regular ESPN was Jose Benavidez. The numbers that he did for Jose Benavidez were these. It peaked at 2.8 million viewers for Terence Crawford versus Jose Benavidez. 2.8 million. So 2.8 million for Jose Benavidez, a peak of 1.6 million for Aegis Kalvanakis. That is a drop of 1.2 million off the peak. The averages. Remember, I'm going with the higher average that I heard for Terence Crawford versus the Green Machine. Average 1.4 million average for the average for Jose Benavidez versus Terence Crawford was 2.2 million people average. So the average dropped about 800,000. So the peak dropped 1.2 million people, and the average dropped by around 800,000 between the last two fights where Terence Crawford fought on regular ESPN. Here's another comparison. If you look at what Vasily Lomachenko did when Vasily Lomachenko fought on the same card after the Heisman Trophy, right? Because this was after the Heisman Trophy Awards. This is the second time ESPN has put on a boxing event after the Heisman Trophy Awards. The last one was Jose Pedraza versus Vasily Lomachenko. That fight was 2.2 million. I think it was 2.2 million people watched the fight between Vasily Lomachenko and Jose Pedraza. That is about a 400,000 peak, higher than what Terence Crawford just did. So it was a drop in the performance for Terence Crawford by 1 million peak and 800,000 on average for the show. And it was also a drop from the last telecast after the Heisman Trophy of a peak of about 400,000. That, my friends, if you look at that, tells you that Terence Crawford, for whatever reason, lost the interest of a lot of fighters a lot of fight fans that watched him fight the last time on ESPN. That is not a positive trend. That is what you call a negative trend. You're going down, not up. What could be the cause for this? Was it the guy that he was fighting? Egis Kalvanakis, Jose Benavidez. Neither one of those guys are tremendously known fighters. Neither one of them. I don't recall what the fight on the undercard of Terence Crawford versus Jose Benavidez was, but I don't believe it was a fight of the caliber of Teofimo Lopez versus Richard Comey, but yet the numbers declined. My belief is that this is the consistent lack of promotion of Terence Crawford by Top Rank. Terence Crawford is losing momentum as a fighter because Terence Crawford is not fighting significant fights, because Top Rank is not providing him with significant fights. Also, Terence Crawford is not being promoted as the top fighter and is somebody that people should see by ESPN or by Top Rank. I don't think that there is any way that you can interpret these numbers and say that this is a positive trend for Terence Crawford. I'm sure I've listened to people try to polish the turd by saying things like, what did Mike Coppinger? Mike Coppinger came up with a number of a peak average, like a peak average of 1.6. Steven Espinoza was on Twitter and said, look, man, there's no such thing as a peak average. I'm going to paraphrase what Steven Espinoza said. That's an oxymoron. A peak, by definition, is the highest point at which the highest number of views for 1 minute during the fight. You cannot have an average peak because there's not more than one peak. An average is you take all of the different increments of 1 minute, right? And you say, this is how many people are there. You divide all that, you add them up and you divide them by the number of minutes, the number of units that you counted, and there you get the average. Okay? There's not an average peak. There's just an average, there's an average viewership. Then Mike Coppinger changed it to the highest average block. Well, what is the highest average block? Was that during the peak, like 1 minute before the peak and 1 minute after the peak? So you can give the number be a peak and you can give an average for a 1 minute block in which that peak rested. That, my friends, is what I always point out when people say, women lie, men lie, numbers don't lie. Yeah, men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie, but men and women use numbers to lie all the time. If Terence Crawford before this fight was made said that his numbers are up there with the best of them, he said his numbers show what he's about, he was obviously referring to the last time when his viewership was the number one. I think he was number one in 2018. number one in 2018 as far as the shows, the boxing telecasts on ESPN. In 2018, the highest viewed ESPN show was Terence Crawford versus Jose Benavidez. The number two was Lomachenko versus Jose Pedraza. This year, the numbers have dropped by 1 million. And I do believe that he was second. He dropped to second place as far as the total numbers of views on ESPN. So he dropped he went from number one in 2018 to number two in 2019. His numbers dropped by his average dropped by his peak dropped by over 1 million, and his average dropped by around 800,000. Terence Crawford's got to do something. Bob Arum needs to do something to try to get this guy to where he belongs, and to have people recognize him for being the great fighter that he is. I said this earlier in a live stream that it seems like the only time ESPN and Top Rank push Terence Crawford, they push him as a way to minimize the PBC fighters, minimize the other welterweights and what they're doing, saying that they're not fighting Terence Crawford. But what they don't talk about Terence Crawford when it comes to talking about who the best fighters are on their network, when they want to talk about who the best fighters on their network are, they bring up Vasily Lomachenko. And that level of continuing to push Vasily Lomachenko has had results. Terence Crawford, numbers go down. Vasily Lomachenko is now the number one fighter as far as the ratings go on ESPN. And that, my friend, I do believe is a result of a conscious effort to push Vasily Lomachenko up into the forefront. And the decline in Terence Crawford's viewership is a direct result of that same push. Because by pushing Vasily Lomachenko, they're not pushing Terence Crawford. There's no way that you can get around this. This is not a good performance. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.